these guys are working together in tandem now. Yes, this is gonna help to have a buddy, but again, that guy, when he was down in the arm bar, great move in the ring, but when you're dealing with multiple people and multiple attackers, you've got to be aware that you just lost mobility. Somebody could come up and soccer kick you right in the head. It's not something I'm going to choose to do when I have multiple attackers in the street. It's just not. I'm not going to commit to that one limb.
The information in this podcast is for entertainment and educational purposes. Our informational content cannot address all dangerous situations and cannot guarantee your survival or prevent injuries when the unexpected happens. The decision to carry a firearm, either for recreation or for personal defense, carries the risk and potential for injury and or death. Therefore, it is advised that you seek out and acquire proper training before using a firearm or any firearm-related product.
What are some self-defense techniques?
What would happen if there was a global internet outage?
What should I do if I hear shots ringing out?
Or what I should do if there's a major terrorist attack?
What should I have? What's the best?
What should I do?
What does that look like?
What would you recommend?
Is there anything I could do?
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Dangerous Questions. So last week, I asked you guys if you were utilizing visualization. And again, I want to ramp that challenge up even further with these scenarios that you're breaking down and you're thinking about. You're here for a reason. You showed up to gain knowledge, to become an asset, or to help yourself, or somebody else, or somebody that you love. Are you doing it? Are you actually visualizing? Since last week, have you walked through any scenario that you were actually visualizing or even sitting there and saying to yourself, this is what could happen? And then the next step, guys, is to do it, to get out there. I mean, even if you're worried about a scenario in and around your vehicle, go to your garage, go to your parking lot, whatever it is at the end of the night, and just walk through. It could be as simple as you getting out of the car and saying, and this is where scenarios come into play. There's guys that are trained and that are listening to this, they know what I'm talking about. But if I open up my vehicle and I can pretend like I'm ambushed, right? If I sit there and I open up the car door and I get out and like, oh, I had my head up my butt. Now I'm staring at this guy right in front of me and he's got a gun in my face. Okay, that's visualization. And the ramp up to this, guys, is that you actually start walking through the visualization. There really is nothing better out there than scenario training. You know, the guys down at West Orlando Firearms Training, they do, or WAFT, they do an amazing job. My buddy Philip and the whole crew down there, they do an amazing job at putting these scenarios together again and again and again, so you see a different dynamic. There's actually a question in here. We're going to talk about exposure training, but visualization is a key part of that. And I just want to make sure that you guys are doing that at home and you're thinking about it as we walk through these scenarios. This is Dangerous Questions, an IRONCLAD original. Let's get after the first question.
Hey Dom, you taught a lot about tourniquets, but my question is, what do you do when it doesn't work to stop the bleeding?
All right, straightforward question. You talk about tourniquets, you carry tourniquets, got it. Have a tourniquet, know how to use a tourniquet. What if it doesn't work properly? Well, there's really two things that I wanted to talk about here. First is, did you apply it correctly? That's going to be my first question. If you see a scenario where it's a limb and you put a tourniquet on it and you're still staring at something that's bleeding, my first instinct is to say, okay, well, was it applied properly? Did you have enough pressure? Did you take the slack out of it? All those things that I talked about is what I'm going to question. Now, there's a lot of different methods out there. Again, people talk about this stuff all the time, but typically when you apply a tourniquet immediately and you stand back and say, okay, you know, win the fight, self-aid, buddy aid. I put a tourniquet on, I go back to work, I figure out what's going on. Maybe it was a car accident. I figure out if anybody else is injured, and then I come back to the bleed and it's still bleeding. Well, what I don't want to do is take the tourniquet off. Ideally, I have another tourniquet if it was actually an incorrectly applied tourniquet. Apply tourniquet number 2. Go over the top of it, go above it, go below it. Obviously, you need the room there above the wound, but apply another tourniquet. Crank it down, think a little bit more clearly. Hopefully the bleeding at least slowed down, right? If it didn't, then you weren't able to leave it at all. You got to escalate to the next level. The bleeding has to stop, right? Major hemorrhaging. We've got to get the bleed to stop. So I'm going to do anything that I can to get the bleed to stop. I'm going to try to pack it, put gauze on it, put pressure on it. You know, if I'm putting a tourniquet on something and I'm only focused on the tourniquet and I'm still staring at a bleed and doing nothing, then I'm not doing my job. I am not helping that person and I'm not saving a life. So I want to put direct pressure. Maybe somebody else is helping me out. Maybe I have an extra set of hands. Hey, crank down on this tourniquet while I apply direct pressure, okay? If it wasn't sufficient, I've got to escalate somehow, some way. I'm going to pack it with gauze, put direct pressure, and find a way to get the bleed to stop. Again, this is where great medical training comes into play, but those are my two scenarios. Did you put it on properly? Can you put another tourniquet on? And if not, what's your next step? Was it sufficient in the first place? Maybe I need to pack that wound and get it to stop. Typically, the only thing that you're going to do after the fact if tourniquets are not solving the problem is that direct pressure, packing, bandage, compression to get that thing to stop. And again, what are we doing next? We're looking for an escalated level of care, and I'm going to talk about that in one of these next questions. How do you treat a gunshot wound until the medics arrive? I know depending on where a person is shot, a tourniquet would come into play, but I'm concerned about packing the wound with fragments inside when trying to stop the bleed. Okay, so this is a continuation on the last question. Somebody else brought this in, so we bunched them up together, and we are talking about medical scenarios. First thing, guys, is don't be concerned about the fragments in there. You know, yes, if I see anything visually that I can move without further injuring the person, again, when you have something lodged somewhere or in a wound, you do not want to pull it out. If it's not obvious that it's not obstructing some type of arterial bleed or artery, leave it lodged, because that might actually be what's stopping the bleed. You know, if it's not your instinct to do that, leave it alone. Fragments are a whole nother scenario with a gunshot wound. If I get fragments in there there's lead blown out all over the place, I am not even thinking about that. I'm just thinking about getting the bleed to stop, to packing that thing until the bleed is done and it shuts off. One thing that came out of one of my recent medical courses a couple of years ago, carry more gauze than you think you need. That's a tip that I'm just going to give you guys right here and now. If you've got one thing of gauze, it's probably not enough. Because most times when I had a gunshot wound like that, I was like, man, I wish I had more gauze. And I got really close to running out. And if I had multiple wounds, I would have had nothing else to use. I mean, obviously you're going to move to what's next. I can use my shirt. I can use a pair of jeans, whatever you can use to pack the wound. Ideally, it's sterile gauze because the escalated medical care is only going to have to deal with that later. I want to keep the wound clean. I want to keep it free of debris. But the primary, guys, is to get the wound to stop bleeding. If it's a gunshot wound, you're going into problem solving. If you've never dealt with this stuff before, you're going to walk up on somebody and you're going to be like, oh my goodness, this is bad, but I've got to fix it and I've got to fix the scenario. There's another one in here too that kind of follows up with even this, but the idea is problem solving. You've got to be able to get your medical kit, know your gear, have enough gauze, pack the wound until it stops bleeding, and then put compression on it and get it controlled until you can escalate a care of medical that is necessary. Buy more gauze. That was my primary one.
Hey Dom, so if somebody gets uncomfortable, and myself, I'm pretty squeamish at the sight of blood and stuff like that. If that's pretty extreme in a first aid situation, how do you deal with that as somebody who gets squeamish around, you know, bodily injuries, bodily fluids?
Okay. There's a lot of different things out there that people are concerned about, and this is one of them, right? This is a real, and by the way, thanks for bringing it up, and I appreciate you being brave enough to say, hey, this is something I'm challenged with. You know, being open about that is hard, but that's the first step, is confronting what the fear is now and frequently, because if you don't do anything about it and you just keep shoving it aside and then it ends up confronting itself, I'm gonna pray and hope that you rise to the occasion. And even if it happened right now, right after hearing this, that you're gonna walk into that fight and say, you know what, this is something that usually bothers me, but this is a life-threatening scenario, and I'm gonna step up here. But just like I brought up WAFT, the West Orlando firearms training guys that do scenarios, it's about exposure to those environments. So if I know that I'm challenged with something, say it's needles, say it's blood, whatever it may be, if that's a fear that you have, I'm gonna challenge you guys, and we got a bunch of challenges coming out of these videos now, but I'm gonna challenge you guys to expose yourself to these environments. If blood is something that you have to deal with and you know you're gonna be challenged when it comes up, then find ways to put yourself, hey, you know, if somebody's getting their blood drawn, maybe you can go with them when they're getting their blood drawn. A family member, hey, do you mind if I go with you? That way you can work through what's going on in your mind. Like, is it an irrational fear? Most of them are. Actually, all of them are. All of them are irrational fears. It's only going to slow you down from being the best version of yourself in the actual fight. So you get squeamish around blood, get squeamish around needles, get squeamish around, you know, different bodily things that are going on, maimed limbs. For me, it's always been like, oh, this is the actual reality. You have to accept the reality as it is and just be like, what am I gonna do to be the best version of myself to move forward here? That is the only thing that matters. And if it's a challenge, you have to expose yourself to that environment. If it keeps coming up and you're like, man, I just can't get over this. If you're trying to do it on your own, it's time to now seek advice. Go find somebody else that can help you work through those scenarios. If I was right there with you, I'd be like, okay, I'm gonna call my buddy John from Templar Medical. We're gonna put a medical scenario together for you, and you're gonna walk in and we're gonna talk through it. I'm not even gonna have you touch the patient. I'm just gonna have you walk in and have blood squirting all over the place and say, hey, what emotions are you feeling right now? What are you going through? What is your brain thinking of? What are you visualizing? And how do we conquer those fears and get to the next step? Maybe it's a small win, maybe it's a larger win, but you create enough momentum, all of a sudden 5 years from now, you're like, I can't even believe that was an issue. I can't even believe I let that slow me down. And most of the time on the other side, that's what you'll find. So if it's a fear of blood in any one of these scenarios, I challenge you to continue to expose yourself to those environments until you become comfortable with it and use your best instincts and rise to the occasion. Great question. And again, I love when people show their heart and put their heart on the sleeve for these questions, guys. It's awesome because we're all learning from this. Next question. How do you decide to stop savings? This is, you know, when I read this, it definitely gets me emotional, but how do you decide to stop saving a life because they're way too damaged or they're too far gone to help others, and go and help others? So this is kind of like if I'm going to assume that there's other people there, well, maybe it's a mass casualty scenario, or maybe it's in combat. And I've actually dealt with this more times than I can actually count. I've come up on somebody that is a brother of mine, or somebody that, you know, I care about, or even somebody that I didn't know, and I've had to go through this scenario. And I say to myself, right off the bat, my instinct is like, man, I want to do everything that I possibly can to help this person survive this scenario. And, you know, Lewis was one of them. You know, Lewis was one of the guys that, you know, out of that scenario, I was like, what can I do to save my brother? And you're using your best instincts, and really that's what you need to do in those scenarios. I'm gonna try to keep helping somebody as long as my instinct is saying that there's a chance, there's an opportunity, there's a glimmer of hope that this person could come out on the other side of this. And I think that that's the best thing that I could give you, is that you've gotten a car accident tomorrow, or you came up against or with somebody that you didn't know, or somebody that was a loved one or a child. You have to put your heart and your instinct into everything that you can do for that person to save their life, while you're trying to escalate and find the next level of care. That is my instinct. So if I'm in the middle of nowhere, right, and I'm in an abandoned desert, there's no next level of care, it's me and somebody that I care about. Well, I have to use my best instincts as when is enough to stop trying. And that's really, really, really difficult to sit here and tell you. And that's why I say I put it back on you to use your best instincts. This is why we have medical training. This is why we understand physiology and how the body works, because eventually you're gonna be like, okay, I've done everything that I possibly can to save this person. And it's time to, in a sense, let go of that scenario. You know, I didn't stop trying when the guys that I loved and cared about were in front of me, but I either stopped trying when somebody else said, hey, that's enough, or B, they were taking over at that point because they had a higher level of skill than me. They were a field surgeon, or they were going into a helo because there was a higher level of care, right? If you think about the escalation in combat, it's like, okay, the scenario just happened. Say for you, the car gets rolled over, or you get T-boned by somebody and then you were lacerated, on the leg or whatever it is, or somebody had trauma to the head. I'm accepting reality as it is, but on that scene, I'm doing everything that I possibly can. Then the ambulance shows up, right? Now you've got guys that are better trained than I am looking at me. Maybe they're better trained than I am. But again, you have to use your best instincts there too. That's why knowing what you're doing is really important in these scenarios. But the ambulance shows up, EMTs show up. Now I'm handing over that level of care, right? Hey, this is what happened. This is what I saw. This is what I did. I'm passing over that knowledge. I'm doing a turnover in that scenario. Now they put the person or the patient in the ambulance. Now the ambulance is going to the hospital. Now the hospital is getting a life flight. Now the life flight is taking them to the surgical room. All these levels of care are escalating the entire time. And with that, I think everybody in that process should be using their experience, their talents, their skills, their prayer in doing the best they can for that person to save that life. And I think that needs to be on everybody's heart. I think we need to approach things that way. So hopefully that adds a little bit of clarity. I've been through this multiple times, and it never gets easy by any means, but I do believe we have a duty and a service to be able to do everything that we can until we feel that we've given it the best of our ability.
We don't just do the filmmaking. We do everything. We've taken a case study of over 30 projects that we've done over the past 15 years, and we put together what we believe is the most effective and efficient content funnel for brands. They need content on a daily basis. They need to be talking to authentic end users. We want your team to bring its most challenging problems and allow us and our team to apply our proven methods to your brand to take it to another level.
Okay, so what should you do when treating a compound fracture? So first of all, let's just paint the picture a little bit about what a compound fracture is. I've broken a bone, or somebody's broken a bone, but not only is the bone broken, there's probably some exposed level of bone with flesh, maybe even bone marrow or arterial bleeding. It's a mangled mess. Okay, I'm gonna start with the worst case scenario. And you just have a mangled fracture, broken bone somewhere on the body, and maybe even possibly some bleeding. So when I think compound fracture, when you think fracture, sometimes you can think about the break without the bleed, but just like anything else, just like we talk about March, massive hemorrhaging, is it bleeding? Is there a bleed that I could either stop, or is there a bleed that I could potentially even make worse with trying to fix what I'm looking at? Using your best instincts and hopefully some level of medical training, I'm trying to understand, I need to get the bleed to stop and then assess it from there. I want to put some type of compression and structure around it. I mean, if it's really bad, if we think of like, a fib being broken in your leg and my bone's sticking out of my shin and it's bleeding a little bit, well, the other thing too here is if I'm treating a compound fracture and somebody else, I actually wrote a note here, one of the first things that you should be thinking about is your mental fortitude, because that person is going to be in some serious pain. This is kind of the visualization part that a lot of people often forget, and then they end up in this scenario. They're like, oh, I wasn't prepared for that. We're kind of transactionally walking through the compound fracture. But your mental fortitude is going to be key here. If I come up on one of my children and they have a compound fracture and they're staring at their broken leg and blood squirting all over the place, there's going to be a level of mental fortitude that I need to be like, okay, they might be screaming, yelling, and not liking the pain, but I still need to do my job. I can't let that slow me down from stopping the bleed, from stopping to put some type of structure in there. And how severe is this? Again, if it's me and them out in the woods and I need to get them to safety, I've got to create some type of structure and support around that limb so it doesn't get worse. talking them through it. Hey, stay calm. It's all good. I'm going to do the best I can, prepping them for what's going to happen next. And really, maybe it's getting them to not look at it or think about something else or have somebody else talking to them in their ear, thoughts of white sandy beaches or something, whatever might get their mind off of a little bit about what's going on. Your mental fortitude, stop the bleed, and then prepare to create some structure around it. Again, that tib-fib scenario where this is mangled and I've got to walk out of the forest now. I've got to walk 3 miles to any type of further care. I want to make sure that I'm thinking about the load and I'm dispersing the load appropriately. If I'm expected to put any type of weight on this at all, right? And again, if it's both tib-fib and I can't put any pressure on it, I mean, there's the dynamic environment of me having to move and walk, so it's possible that I bump into it again. And what I would say about putting a splint on something is to think about it like that, like how do I take the load and the pressure off of that compound fracture? By structuring above it, by structuring below it, by structuring around it, and really creating the load so that there's stability there and there's minimal amount of movement is the best case scenario. Again, that's kind of compound fracture and the medical training simplified for you guys at home that have never had any medical background whatsoever. Hopefully that helps you clear it up a little bit, that if you ever see one of these scenarios, you have your best foot forward and you do something to mitigate or help them move to the next level of care. Hey guys, what's up? This segment of Dangerous Questions is brought to you by Snake Staff Systems. If you guys have heard me talk about them before, they make low-profile tourniquets, and I always say there's no excuse not to have a tourniquet on you, and these guys nailed it with being able to have something on you at all times. Go check them out at snakestaffsystems.com. No excuses. Let's get into the scenario breakdowns, and it's going to be heavy jiu-jitsu, heavy grappling here, so let's check them out. So we've got, a retail store, pretty common. We've got this guy, and he starts vandalizing the place right away. I mean, he's doing it right in front of the officer, which is like complete disrespect. So he's clearly being overt and asking for trouble. That tells me right away this guy already wants to fight. Now, I think the way the officer is handling this right now is calm. I mean, he looks calm to me, he looks composed, but hit pause real quick. Here's one thing that I want to get you guys to understand. Anytime, whether you're a police officer or anybody else trying to be a good citizen, anytime you have a guy that's causing trouble like this, the focus is to lock in on this guy. And I tell people all the time, keep your head on a swivel. Even in this scenario where the guy holding the camera right now, where he is a complete blind side to him. So as soon as you start to engage, make sure you're keeping that head on a swivel, because as soon as I make contact, I have physical contact. Now I can keep my visual up and looking around and scanning in other places. And this comes into play here again soon. Go ahead and keep rolling. This guy loses his handcuffs, and I'm not sure if we'll hear the audio here, but you guys, once he's in a position, because he's grappling, he's doing all the right things. He's grabbing the biceps, he's putting his weight down, he's in the mount position now. He clearly has a little bit of grappling experience. Again, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, human chess, BJJ, great to have. Never going to tell you guys not to get more of that. It's always going to be beneficial for you, especially you guys out there that are putting hands on people every single day. Roll more, get more Jiu-Jitsu. This guy clearly knows a thing or two because he just went right into an arm bar. Now, that was good. He isolated his arm, but what is the downside here for him in this scenario? Well, he's lost mobility. He's locked in this scenario where he's laying on the floor. Somebody could easily come over from that other aisle and soccer kick him right in the head, and he's totally dedicated on that arm. Again, now his buddy came in, swoops in to help him. So these guys are working together in tandem now. Yes, is it going to help to have a buddy? But again, that guy, when he was down in the arm bar, great move in the ring, but when you're dealing with multiple people and multiple attackers, you've got to be aware that you just lost mobility. Somebody could come up and soccer kick you right in the head. It's not something I'm going to choose to do when I have multiple attackers in the street. It's just not. I'm not going to commit to that one limb. Here's the deal. He's pretty much in a controlled environment at this point. That's the context I don't have. He might have been walking around all over the place. He knows the people in there. He sees that he's got one guy causing a ruckus. He's like, all right, I know I'm gonna have to grapple this guy to the ground, and he was pretty calm about it. I think the way he worked through it, even asked for his handcuffs. He's like, hey, you mind grabbing me my handcuffs, please? Again, weapon retention, know your gear, get your stuff together. There's no reason that handcuffs should be flying off you or anything else should be flying off you, but things do happen. I think he did handle it calmly. Luckily, he had a good citizen there to hand him his handcuffs and get the guy restrained and moved to a different level of care or detention. These are just the things you want to think about. He was in the controlled environment, so he was able to do that, but don't commit wholeheartedly to doing something like an armbar in an environment where you have multiple people, because then you're getting soccer kicked in the head, and that's just not good. Win, BJJ. Guys that are practicing it, keep it up. All right, so this guy's, looks like in a store. He's kind of standing in an awkward position. He's clearly has some dialogue going on with somebody else. Hand is sort of in his pocket. Now they're in a shoving match. Okay, that's never great for a combative environment. But looks like he does some type of double leg movement. They've got some grappling going on. Okay, again, manipulation. That's that gi movement. You saw him holding on to the vest. That's why gi is so good, because, okay, jeans, jacket, those are all very, very similar in technique of how we're gripping onto people. Okay, now it looks like he's being choked out and he's done. Okay, so that, when you're in fight and his blood's pumping, his adrenaline's pumping, boom, the guy's out like that. I'm not sure how much knowledge that guy had. It didn't look super clean, but there was some level there. He was at least able to change his level, take the guy down, and work to a point where he had his back to get him choked out. Again, BJJ for the win. If you guys are already rolling, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you're not, there really should be nothing stopping you from getting a base level of knowledge in grappling, because it's only going to serve you well if one of these scenarios ends up happening in your environment. Human chess, know it, embrace it, and again, it's knowledge we have now, so it's kind of ignorant not to. All right, next scenario. All right, this is a subway station. This guy looks like he's at a subway station, changes direction. All right, he is locked onto something going on. Multiple people. Okay, I don't know the context of this scenario here. Okay, this was odd. So these guys looked like they were grappling with each other. They were the problem, and then that guy started to approach, and you never know. I mean, there's scenarios where people will think they're coming to save. Go ahead and pause this for a second. There's multiple scenarios where people think they're going to save a girl. And you are, right? You're doing the right thing, because if a guy is bullying his girlfriend or his wife, whatever the case is, you're trying to do the right thing, and then all of a sudden you're being hit on the back of the head with a beer bottle from the same girl that you just tried to help. Get off my boyfriend, or whatever the case is. So just because somebody's involved doesn't take them out of play necessarily. And it kind of feels like that's what we're seeing in this scenario, is he kind of just broke it up, but now he's turning his back, saying something to that guy. Whatever the need was, he felt the need to sweep this guy, which was a good, clean sweep. Had leverage up top, and he took both his legs out. Now he's on his side. So again, good use of what he knows he needs to do. And I feel like the violence of action was there. He kind of had his adrenaline pumping. He was locked on to where he was going, and he used that to his advantage. Violence of action, quickly come in, mitigate the threat, and then you don't know what that guy's intent is, so I think he handled that well. The other thing, too, to think about is maybe that guy wasn't done with that dude yet. Maybe he did something really bad, and now he's pulling out a blade. Some guys see red in those scenarios, and even though there's a police officer there, they're like, that's it, I'm escalating to the next level. Now I've got the advantage because you just came in and saved me, so that pack mentality shifts, and he's like, all right, my blade's out, now I'm gonna stab you. And I think good officers that have dealt with these scenarios in the past, they know that, so as soon as they go and engage, everybody's the bad guy to me until I figure out who's who. Everybody's a threat. Because the guy that was just on top could easily become more of an issue very quickly. And that's why I like how he's just like, nope, not going to deal with it. Boom, put him on the ground, figure out who's the biggest and highest priority, and then go from there. Ideally, in that scenario, if they're both a problem now, how am I going to move to the other side and figure out how to stack them both up. Who's the highest and biggest threat? Is that guy pulling out a gun? Is he pulling out a blade? Where do I want to position myself while keeping my head on a swivel? Again, this is like the perfect urban environment. You know, you're in a subway, there's multiple people around, you don't know who's who. Looks like there's something on the ground, but I'm looking for weapons, hard surfaces, and multiple people. Again, going back to that combative scenario versus the MMA style. All right, guys, and thank you for tuning in to Dangerous Questions. You know, these questions keep evolving. Add context to these questions, and don't forget the visualization that I talked to you guys about earlier on in the last episode, in this episode. Start walking through what those visualizations are. Go to your car, go to your house, turn the lights off, change the dynamic. Don't just think about them, guys, and be worried about them. I want you to follow through with actually visualizing them. And I'm gonna ramp it up even further in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to Dangerous Questions, guys. An Ironclad original. God bless everybody. See you in the next episode.